So you're not saying that they knew that they were going to be rolling it back 3 years later and try to send people home. Did they know that part?
Yes, I think they did.
You think they did?
They think they did. There's no chance in hell these people leave Canada.
Come to our country. We welcome you. We'll hug you at the airport. And then all of a sudden, fuck you, immigrant. What are you doing here? You screwed up our country, right?
The Canadian dream, as the way we knew it, is tarnished, or maybe it's fading away. I don't want to sound too dystopian, but it's reality.
Well, hi there. Welcome to episode 350 of Rook. I'm Jian. And on today's episode, we want to focus on the changing conditions for new immigrants to Canada. Specifically, is the Trudeau government betraying Iranian immigrants? Is the current Canadian government betraying Iranian immigrants? Now, that may sound a little harsh or reductive, like this is some kind of Trudeau-focused attack. But how else to look at a new law that says the same Iranian students who were invited to Canada in recent years may now be forced to go back? The situation is such a mess that it seems like policy has been conducted with a roll of the dice, and sadly it's new immigrants, including many Iranians, who will end up paying the price. Is the Trudeau government betraying Iranian immigrants? Look, if you're one of the majority in our audience who does not live in Canada, forgive me for treating this issue as if we're all in the same boat, but this kind of immigration breakdown is probably worthy of international note. And yes, this is about all immigrants coming to this country, but for the sake of this program, we will focus on the Iranians. So let's do a quick recap of recent history. Canada's immigration system was forever a model for the rest of the world. Year after year, thousands of newcomers chose Canada as their future. Many of us were among those immigrants, and nothing seemed that notable about it except the pride the country would take in being a mosaic, a nation with a balance of laws, Canadian values and traditions, a safe place with a stable economy, all good overall. But things began to change with a pandemic call. Oh, immigration is not the villain here. Bad policy and a runaway train is. In 2021, the Trudeau government made international headlines by declaring Canada was going to let in 1 million new immigrants over the next 3 years. This was ostensibly to address labor shortages and to show the world just how progressive and open Canada was. Critics issued concerns about how to integrate and deal with this record level of immigration. The Liberal government's response was to not let in 1 million over 3 years, but to make it 3 million. An unrestrained floodgate with no discernible plan for how to make it work. When you bring in so many without laying the groundwork, without enough housing, jobs, or infrastructure, you're setting everyone up for failure. And so now, a highly unpopular Prime Minister and his government are trying to roll it back without a plan to do that either. And those who will most suffer are those to whom promises were made. Is the Trudeau government betraying Iranian immigrants? Temporary residents like international students and work permit holders are now being told there's no room for them anymore. Up until very recently, an Iranian newcomer on a student visa could reasonably expect to stay, to parlay their studies into work opportunities and eventual residency. Many came with that expectation. Now, that pathway has been effectively taken away, leaving countless Iranians stranded between hope and despair. And what's particularly galling is the hypocrisy embedded in this reversal. For years, Canada has presented itself as a beacon of hope, encouraging immigrants, including Iranians, to invest their futures here. University tuition fees, housing markets, local economies all benefited from the influx of these newcomers. Yet now, instead of embracing the energy and ambition these immigrants bring, the government is intent to cast them aside, citing logistical concerns. Look, yes, a floodgate of immigrants was a dumb idea, and it's on you, Canadian government. You created this problem. The floodgate also contributed to a documented rise in anti-immigrant sentiment. For the first time in decades, studies show that nearly 60% of Canadians believe there are too many immigrants being let in, and that includes many Iranian Canadians themselves who feel the same way. Is it any wonder that so many new immigrants are left feeling disillusioned and betrayed? When you promise someone a home, a future, a sense of belonging, and then take it away, it's not just a policy failure, it's a moral failure. And it's among the worst of Trudeau's transgressions just yet, and it's likely one that Canada will long regret. In failing to plan, the government has not just failed the immigrants, it has failed itself, and worse, it has tainted the image of a country once celebrated for welcoming hearts and open arms. Immigration without preparation isn't inclusion, it's illusion. the Trudeau government's new immigration policies threaten to send many of these newcomers packing, leaving shattered dreams and broken promises in their wake. Is the Trudeau government betraying Iranian immigrants? It's hard to make the case for any other take. Okay, coming up, this episode of Rook will be focused on immigration, Canada, Iranians, and the new law that is changing the landscape. We have two immigration experts joining us, and you don't want to miss it. This is Rook. Feeling kind of thrifty. Here we go, episode 350. It's December 12th, 2024. This is Rook. Hi there. Welcome to episode 350 of Rook. We hit 350. I'm Jian Gomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto. Hello to you from Canada. Salam dostan aziz, durud bar shoma. Hope you're doing well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Today, we do want to deal with an issue that has become quite a big deal here in Canada. The implications of a massive influx of immigrants to Canada in recent years, over 3 million in the last 3 years. And now, as the government backtracks on that, a new law that will create the conditions where many, including many new Iranian immigrants, will be forced back to their home countries, back to Iran. We have a good panel on this here in the studio with two regulated Canadian immigration consultants, Mehran Aminian and Houshang Lotfi. That's coming up in just a minute. Looking forward to having the guys here. But first, I should just quickly say, building on the announcement I made in this space on this show last week, Rook Live 4. This is where we do Rook in front of a live audience in a theater. This is our fourth installation. Rook Live 4 is coming. It has been announced. Tickets are now on sale. So here are the details. Thursday, February 6th, 2025. Thursday, February 6th, in the Greater Toronto area. There's an area just north of Toronto called Thornhill. Some of us know it well. City Playhouse Theatre, a beautiful, large new theater called City Playhouse Theatre. Thursday, February 6th, and here is the lineup. Shohreh Aghdashlu, the icon, the actress, the activist. She will be the recipient of the Rook Media Icon Award. We are so excited that she's flying in for this. Shohreh Aghdashlu, I'll do an onstage interview with her. Fardar Farahzad, the well-known anchor, I guess probably the best-known news anchor in Iranian media these days, from Iran International. Fardar Farahzad making a rare appearance outside of his own network to come and be part of our show. Our friends, the great fusion band Dang Show, on the occasion of the release of their new album. We're excited to have them. The great singer-songwriter Siamak Mer, the great pianist, young pianist, you got to catch Ghazal Akhundzadeh. She goes by Ghazal Piano. She'll be performing an original piece with our very own Anahita Nayabi doing a classic dance. We're so looking forward to that. The journalist Mahsa Mortazavi, the DJ Blanche Echo, and our very own Pega Ganji will also be joining me for a roundup live on stage. Pega, by the way, will be back finally here next week on the show after an absence for 2 or 3 weeks. We're looking forward to having Pega back. Rook Live 4, February 6th, a killer lineup. All killer, no filler. Tickets on sale now. Now, check out our website. You can check out, first of all, go to Instagram. It's easiest. And in the bio on Instagram, we have a link to our tickets. You can get them there. Or you can go to our website, rookmedia.com. It'll be on the front page there. Tickets have just gone on sale. So if you want the good seats, if you're one of those who care about where you're sitting, by the way, it's all the same price. I mean, there's the VIP and the premium seats. And so basically it's whoever snaps up the tickets the fastest in the first week. So you want to get your tickets this week, again, on our Instagram page, at our website, or the City Playhouse. If you want to go look up City Playhouse and go to their website, it's there as well. Tickets for Rook Live 4. We can't wait to get there. We can't wait to see you there. We hope you join us. And by the way, if you're not from the Toronto area and you want to come into Toronto, this is a good time. There's nothing that says see Toronto like the middle of the winter. Actually, Toronto is great in the summer. But for those of you who are tired of the sun and warm weather, those of you living in Southern California, why not experience a little Toronto winter and come see Rook Live for February 6th? All right, there you go. Let's get to our feature panel and our feature issue. Here we go. Let's get to our feature panel. It feels like Canada's immigration system was forever a model, the model for the rest of the world. Year after year, hundreds of thousands of newcomers chose Canada as their future. We were part of those immigrants, and nothing seemed that notable about it except the pride the country would take in being a mosaic, a country built on immigration with a balance of laws and Canadian values and traditions, a safe place, a stable economy. That was the promise that many Iranians and other immigrants came here with, an Eden, a sanctuary, or a model place. Then 3 years ago, the Canadian government suddenly decides to let in masses of new immigrants and ends up bringing in a record 3 million new people to Canada in some sort of pledge to address labor shortages and demonstrate how open and progressive the country is. By any measure, that gambit seems to have backfired, so much so that the same government is now paddling as hard as it can to come up with ways to send a bunch of those new immigrants back where they came from. It may be outrageously bad policymaking, but it also has had particular implications for a lot of new Iranian immigrants who came here with a certain promise of integration, work, and life, and now face prospective deportation of one form or another. So let's get to our panel for the episode 350 of Rook, and the question, is the Trudeau government betraying Iranian immigrants? First up, he's a friend of Rook and an immigration expert. Mehran Aminian is an Iranian-Canadian lyricist, composer, vocalist, and also happens to be a respected, regulated Canadian immigration consultant. He is the co-founder and the lead consultant at Bloomington Immigration Services in Toronto. Hello, Mehran.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to have you here.
Finally.
Finally. And Houshang Lotfi is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and a member of the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. He also happens to be an MBA, Persian overachiever, and a member of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. Hello, Houshang.
Hi. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting.
Nice to have you here as well.
Thanks.
So, guys, let's start off in general. My question today, the title of this episode, is not meaning to be provocative or cheeky. It's a real question. You can ask, is Canada or is the Canadian government or is the Trudeau government betraying Iranian immigrants? Like I say, it's a general question. We're going to get into the details, but let me put that question to both of you before we get started. Mehran.
Well, if you look at the grand scheme of things here, this Liberal government has been through, obviously, after taking over, they wanted to push their liberal agenda as far as immigration goes. Basically, it was something that we could actually expect from this government. Above that, we had the pandemic. So the government, the main issue the government faced after and during pandemic was that they couldn't have enough immigration applications processed for the obvious reason. They couldn't have the people come in and actually get their application processed.
Borders were closed.
Yeah,
COVID,
borders were closed, and
that.
then also the obviously it was normal that at some point they thought, okay, so now we should fix some of these temporary measures. The way they did it, though, it's funny because they should have stopped many of these temporary measures. They should have basically changed them or actually controlled them, as opposed to just open up the country, open up the borders to many people, mostly on temporary resident visas, which actually could be study permit, work permit, or visitor visa. And then now try to overcorrect what they did wrong before. That's the main issue.
Well, that's the issue. But the question was, the overbearing question I wanted to start with was, has the government betrayed immigrants? We say Iranian immigrants because we're Iranians, and that's who our audience is for the sake of this panel. You gave a very nuanced answer that didn't really answer that. The question I suppose I'm saying is, were Iranians promised something that is not being delivered now?
I would not call it betrayal per se, because I think government even surprised itself, by opening up the country, and then now say, oh, we did right. They found out a bit late, but they found out that it was completely wrong. The policies they actually adjusted during pandemic, they just instead of having a phase of actually slowing it down, actually control it, they just try to drastically stop it.
The poll numbers might have had something to do with
exactly, with a hope to win the next election.
Houshang, your answer to that first question.
Sure. Well, Jian, what I think is the government knows and knew what they're doing. Like back in the day, as I was talking to you before this session, the new immigration minister, right at the time that he took over the ministry, he said, the students are a lucrative business for Canada. And he tweeted this after taking over from Sean Fraser, who has been expanding enormously the capacities, and he has been like giving promises to many, many programs. He came and said, students are a lucrative business for Canada. So yeah, they were thinking that they're
immigration
taking
is
all
business.
Is a business. They're taking all this business in. They're taking all these monies. Like per stats, the funds that the international students are injecting to Canadian economy is massive. Nobody can deny that, and the government knows
Well, if
that.
anyone knows, sorry to cut you off, if anyone knows an international student here in Toronto, on average, they're usually paying what, 4-6 times the amount of a Canadian citizen.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. And to your point, I personally think government knew what's they're doing, and what they're planning was, as a socialist government, I'm kind of putting myself in that position of saying, they said that, okay, we're going to make the government even chubby and chubbier and bigger, and by that we are going to start employing people and showing that our all numbers are skyrocketing, whereas the others may not have been able to fulfill that. But they didn't know that this will be backfire to the government at the same time.
Well, when you say they knew what they were doing, you're not saying that they knew that they were going to be rolling it back 3 years later and try to send people home. Did they know that part?
Yes, I think they did.
You think they did?
They think they did.
That's very, that would be a very devious crisis of bad faith from our government.
Well, that's what I think, because as a person who is in heart liberal Democrat,
Right.
I think they knew, and they knew that they are going to milk this cow, per se what Mehran said, and they're going to milk it. And all of a sudden, at one point in time, they will say, you know what, you were on a work permit, you were on a study permit, goodbye.
But that's antithetical to the... See, part of the confusion here, or part of what I really don't understand as a Canadian citizen who saw it happening, who has, from the day we came here as immigrants, lauded Canada as this wonderful place. I love Toronto, that it's so multicultural, multiracial, and who is now part of the 60% of the country, myself, going, what's going on here? This is too... How can you let 3 million people in within 2 or 3 years and not think that there's going to be negative implications, just in economics, socializing them, cultural, whatever it might be? It feels... What I don't understand is how we went in 2021... In 2021, it's interesting. If you go back, there's news articles on CNN, Al Jazeera. It made global news that Canada was going to let in a record 1 million immigrants over the next 3 years.
Exactly.
In other words, it was international news that 1 million people were going to be let in over the next 3 years. It ended up being 3 million people. Why? How?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. Let me, I'd like to add something to the betrayal part. If you want to...
The betrayal you denied.
Well, if you want to talk betrayal, when betrayal happened, especially to the Iranian community, right after Zan Zindagi Azadi movement, when they started actually, it looked like a nice gesture. It looked like, okay, you know what? You're Persian. You're already in Canada.
Come on in.
You think you'll be under persecution if you go back? Why don't you stay? Get a 3-year open work permit. Get a study permit. You know what they did? Actually, they avoided a massive number of refugee claims by giving that privilege to Iranians, because they knew many of these people would stay here and actually claim refugee status. They thought, okay, you know what? It'll be a burden on government. We have to pay them. Why don't we actually give them proactively a right to work or right to study? Because once you got this, you can't go back after 3 years and say, now I want to claim refugee.
Which is happening now. I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware of that. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
If you don't mind. I have had cases, because I have this privilege and right going to the hearings that we were talking about. There has been cases, like I would say in the past couple of months, that they have gone to the RPD, Refugee Protection Division, and the board member has said, where were you in the past 3 years? And now I'm handling their cases to Refugee Appeal Division.
And they say we had a work permit.
We had a program. I was working here, and the judge or the board member is right. He's asking, where were you in the last 2 or 3? So the trend is shifting. They're saying that, okay, after 2 or 3 years, where were you?
But do you, Mehran, agree with Houshang's quite startling feeling or assertion that the Canadian government actually knew that it was going to be doing what it's doing now? It was going to hit a point where it actually starts sending people home?
I tend to disagree. I thought they didn't thought it through, and they're actually caught by surprise. And it's actually beyond me. How is it possible as a G7 country you should have some comprehensive plan for your next 30 years, for example, 50 years? How can you be so wrong with certain policies and then continuously try to just backpedal or fix your policies? You should have a bigger plan and then try to find the details here and there.
See, Houshang, the reason why it's difficult for me to believe too is that it seemed to me, again, maybe it's smoke and mirrors, but that the Liberal government and the Prime Minister himself, Trudeau, it was intoxicated with this idea of look how different we are. Compared to what you just saw with Trump from 2016 to 2020. We're going to open the borders. Look at me kissing the Syrian refugees at the airport, all of which is very nice. But that came with this utter irresponsibility of let's just open it up. In that case, then it's hard to believe that this was actually tactical, that it was thought out. It looks more like let's do something that we think is going to be in the liberal tradition to the extreme and sort of please a progressive, for lack of a better blunt term, woke mindset, you know?
I think you're absolutely right. What I'm thinking is I can't understand that if a government with all these officials, policymakers who have been working in this area, in this field, didn't know what they're doing. That's kind of my position on this, because they have thought through it. I think because it's a G7 country. It's hard actually for me to understand or rationalize what they have done and saying that, you know what, poor people didn't know that. So that's kind of.
I remember that, like I said, I'd like to emphasize on this. This Liberal government, this Trudeau government, is a government of overcorrection. Remember, one of the main winning points for Trudeau was that famous "a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian." So they tried to overcorrect what Harper was doing by actually going after even Canadian citizens, revoking citizenship. So you're absolutely right. He tried to be the Mr. Nice to this expense for the whole country.
There is a before I get into the topic of betrayal, and I want to kind of see if we can get granular about it, get into the weeds and of what has happened to people who are temporary immigrants here, etc. Just to fix the terms of who is coming in the country. From what I understand, of those 3 million, actually less than a million are traditional immigrants. It's really temporary immigrants that make up the majority, which are a mixture of temporary foreign workers and international students, right?
And visitor visa.
And visitor visa. Why are those the people that were suddenly the ones who were let in?
So again, right after COVID, this trend started, as you already mentioned. And I think Houshang is actually would agree with me. Still to this point, applying for permanent residence, Canadian permanent residency, and coming to Canada is a lengthy process, and it's where actually you would be put under so much, you have to provide sufficient pieces of evidence to show that you are capable of speaking English or French, you have well experience in your craft, you're graduated from a university, so, and it takes, even to this point, if you want to come in first, like as a permanent resident, you have to go through a lengthy process. An officer will actually check every single document that you will submit. It's much easier. The threshold is much lower for TRVs, temporary resident visas. So it's much easier to apply for them, and actually it's
Easier for the applicants, easier for the country.
and shorter to process, right? So you would know, maybe it takes 2 months for you to know if you get the visitor visa or not, or maybe not more than 6 months for any of this, right? Especially if you're in the country with certain policies, like the public policy that everybody talk about, there's a policy Iranian, we call it. It's basically, is it around 2 months now for the process?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So in 2 months you can get a 3-year work permit. And you don't even need to do anything. You don't even pay fees because you're excluded from basically your. You don't need to pay fees to the government either. So just imagine the bulk of this the number that we're talking about is TRV people who actually came to Canada and then changed status, or right off the bat.
And just out of curiosity, I don't know if you know the answer to this, Houshang, I'll throw it at you. When we've seen this massive influx, for example, of Iranian immigrants, I mean, anybody who lives in the Greater Toronto area, I know people are listening to around the world, just to define the terms, we've seen this huge expansion of the Iranian community in Canada, as people around the world in the diaspora will know, but particularly in the Greater Toronto area, it's grown into the hundreds of thousands just in the last, say, 5 years, even in the last 3 years. How many of those Iranians would be in this class of temporary?
Well, I would say per stats that has been released by IRGC from January 2023 up to January 2024, about 45,000 work permits has been processed by IRGC, like the same policy that Mehran is talking about. In 1 year, it has been like 45,000. So if we extrapolate it backward and onward, I would say by now we will have about 150,000 Iranians holding this public policy work permit. Although I would say,
and that's the temporary
that's
situation.
TRV. Exactly. So they're not being promised any kind of permanent residency, etc., etc.
Would they be subject to? We haven't gotten to it yet, but they would be subject to the new law saying that they potentially are going to be sent home.
Potentially. And what my takeaway from this part is that the government wanted to bring into your answer that you asked from Mehran, I would say, as I said, like they said, study permits, lucrative business. Workers, yes, they will come in, pay taxes, even make our government even more heavy and more chubby, and whenever we want, we'll get them back.
A pattern is emerging here where Houshang seems to see the government's actions as more Machiavellian, as part of a, for lack of a better term, a plot, where you see it, you have this romantic vision that the Liberal government was just falling over itself trying to bring people in.
Let's make it clear that I'm not going to vote Liberal next year. but yes, I think they're not, for lack of better words, they're stupider. They're more stupid than that. They haven't thought it through.
You want to give them enough credit that they were just too stupid.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent. Let me talk about this term betrayal, because I think it is. I'll admit that this won't help me on Instagram if somebody just sees the title and reacts to it, but it is reductive. I mean, I'm using a term, and I've thought about what is the appropriate term. But let me explain how I came to betrayal and to what the betrayal to those coming here would be. And I believe that it's twofold. On the one hand, that this is not Canada. There is not the nirvana, the Garden of Eden, as I said earlier, that you would have thought it to be, and rather that you're going to face skyrocketing rents and massive tuition debt and anti-immigrant sentiment, which we can also talk about. That has been fueled by the growth in immigration here. But then two, the second part of the twofold, that you now may be at risk of, in fact, being sent back unceremoniously to Qazvin or, wherever you're coming from. So let me take those two one at a time. How often in recent months, I mean, now you can give me your own anecdotal evidence if you want, how often in recent months, actually, let me start with a quote. Let me start with a comment that I read under a story about immigrant conditions in Toronto. This was interesting. This was in a major newspaper. It said, the quote is, an immigrant student told me she was lured by, this is now they're talking about an Indian immigrant. She was lured by the ads in India to move to Canada. They promised housing, a job. When she got to Canada, she had to room with 4 people in a 1-bedroom apartment, worked the graveyard shift at Tim Hortons, and couldn't get into the classes she needed at school. She returned to India because she said her quality of life was actually better there. Why would Canada bring immigrants to the country with lies like this? How often in recent months and years have you encountered immigrants, Iranian immigrants, coming here with that kind of reality, that some kind of promise of economic stability, if not prosperity, and then to find conditions that are not what they expected?
Well, it's actually a chronic issue right now. But like you said, it's a twofold thing. We have to remember the Persian mentality is a bit different. I've had so many clients, friends, family members. They asked me to help them come to Canada, but with a visitor visa to visit Canada. And then once they're here, they say, you know what, I'm going to apply for this open work permit. And I say, okay, what's the great plan though? What's going to happen? How do you want to end becoming a permanent resident? We have this mentality of "Hala ye chizi mishe."
Exactly.
And it's killing us in politics, in art.
So it's the immigrants' fault.
To some extent, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they haven't thought it through. So and again,
Well, what do they expect when they come here? I mean, that's part of the. And how much is Canada responsible for the expectations that they may have?
some of them are completely in dark. I had as recent as today, actually, one of my co-workers in the office would actually laugh when she heard this. She told me that I had this call for the consultation with a potential client, and they asked, okay, how much you charge? I said, this is the fee for the service for you to actually get the visitor visa. And say, is it including accommodation? They don't know what's happening.
Is there? What's the rider? How many? What's the meal plan I'm getting? But whose responsibility is that?
To a great extent, government has. If as an immigration accepting country, you should have enough PR to educate people what to expect, and they don't have that. Yes, when you come to Canada,
the thing is, I mean, I take your point of let's see what happens, and that there are certainly that makes sense that some immigrants are coming with that kind of delusion. But we also know people. I know people. I would imagine you've encountered them, if I know them, that somebody who was a doctor in Iran that may not have thought they could come here and suddenly be a doctor when they get to Canada, but would have thought that they would have ended up in a better situation than driving an Uber or being part of the gig economy, right? Are you familiar with those kind of cases?
Actually, it was a fantastic example because that's a chronic issue that we have faced. I'm sure Houshang has many of these examples as well, especially people in healthcare field, doctors per se, nurses. We have a shortage. It's not even a secret.
We being Canada.
Canada is a mess. If you ever have to go to an ER, we all experience it. It's just a nightmare, right? So we do have a problem. There are certain provinces that they actually have in critical stage as far as healthcare practitioners. But then this government, not any government, any Canadian government, has failed to put policies to actually bring in those internationally accredited, professionals, doctors, nurses, whatever, to actually bring them here and integrate into the system, or at least find a way to get them up and running faster. Many of people, you mentioned Uber driver. Actually, I'm sure he's okay with me talking about it. My own cousin is a very good doctor in Shiraz. He came here. He tried to test the waters if he can actually. Of course, he applied for the open work permit first, but then he thought if he could actually get his license, approved here, so he can actually practice. It's almost impossible, and it's a big failure from the government's side.
Although, on the other hand, Houshang, wouldn't that be exactly what the government wants? If there's a labor shortage, let's bring in skilled people from other countries who can deal with the labor jobs that Canadians otherwise are not doing.
Could be, yeah. The government is wanting people to work for them. Like, they don't care if they're doctors, physicians. They just want the people coming in with imaginary kind of, I would say, haven in their mind. And from the other part, I would say, yeah, as Mehran said, it's twofold. Some people are misleadingly thinking that coming to Canada means prosperity. Of course, any person sitting in this room, I'm sure that they have gone through in-depth graduate level.
Yeah. Macaroni and cheese.
Exactly.
But isn't it partly your responsibility? I mean, aren't you the guys who are in the front lines of telling the person who's in Shiraz that, by the way, when you get here, it ain't going to be, palatial,
Yeah, well, for sure. But what percentage of the market do I have? What percentage of the market does Mehran have? It's a matter of a spectrum of people who are practicing in this area. Not all of them are honest with their client. Maybe even lawyers, maybe even RCICs, maybe even people who are not RCICs are trying. We were talking with Mehran before this session that many of them are just starting to practice, and we can see them like in streets of Toronto. They're advertising easily. Of course, IRCC has put in place some measures to control them, or CICC has put some measures to control them, but it's not effective. And we have been telling to many of our clients or potential clients saying that do not trust any person who is saying, I guarantee for you the results, I guarantee for you the job offer, I guarantee for you when you get here you will have this rooming, housing, etc.
I think those are most of our sponsors. I can't. But we've met some of them.
So for that reason, the people are believing. And the other day I was talking with one of my colleagues saying that, unfortunately, I'm going to blame first ourselves, us as Iranians would love to buy dreams. So any person, if I'm giving them a truth and reality to the person who is interviewing me or talking to me, and if the other person says, no, you will get the job like this, you will be a winner, they will buy that better because they're projecting and presenting a better future for them, no matter how realistic Houshang is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I've seen myself with some of the people, even some of our Rook staff over the years, people who've come from Iran very recently, who were excited when they got here, and who slowly the reality sinks in of life here. That can be really difficult for a new immigrant that doesn't have a lot of work experience, that has to work for minimum amounts or work in an Iranian business under the table or whatever the case may be. So there's something of a discrepancy in terms of expectations there. The other thing being, in terms of the betrayal, the reality of what they face, that with the economic downturn or difficulties that have come as a product of this mass migration to Canada, it's not just Canadians who have been here for generations that are affected by that. In fact, in many cases, it's the new immigrants who are more affected by the rents skyrocketing or the inflation or all of that, right? How do you consult with people about that?
Wanted to bring something up first about the massive, because this is going to be a huge issue. I really want to touch upon this first before answering your question, and I might forget your question.
I'm not sure you've answered any of my questions. I ask a question and then you say I want to say something else first.
It's like a political.
And then we forget the question. I go to Houshang and get the question answered.
Like a presidential debate. I have an agenda to push.
I think you're running for the Liberal government since you think they've been doing such a good job. Go ahead.
On the same note as they're being stupid, next year, like within this January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2025, this is Mark Miller's statement.
The immigration minister.
The immigration minister. We will have 4.9 million people who will lose their status in Canada. Their temporary status will be expired. So, and apparently Mark Miller is quite convinced that these people, every single one of them, will voluntarily leave.
We're going to get to that. Yeah, I mean, they'll just choose to leave. Yeah.
Just imagine, again, they're being behind. If they need to they need to think about it yesterday. It's already late, because we know that majority of these people will stay. We'll find a way to stay.
Hang on, though. I'm going to get to that. I was still, you're jumping ahead.
Okay.
See, if you just answer the question instead of forecasting the next
questions, go to Houshang.
my question was still that people are coming here, and then they're realizing that the conditions are not great. Let me add something to that now that I was going to talk about too, which is that anti-immigration, there's a number of studies now, anti-immigration sentiment, not just the bullshit sort of overt racism that we always see, but general anti-immigrant sentiment has grown. In fact, it's skyrocketed.
Globally, though.
Globally, but also in Canada. For the first time in decades, in at least 3 decades, a majority of Canadians, almost 60% of Canadians, think there are too many immigrants in the country. This used to be part of it's almost like our brand is, we love having immigrants here. Look at us, instead of these other countries that are build the wall or whatever. So something is going on where that influx of immigrants who've come in has created the conditions economically, culturally, socially, where people who are here, including, by the way, some immigrants, some Iranians who've been here for a few decades, are going, enough, what's going on? And that doesn't make life comfortable for somebody who's just come here either. Can you speak to that at all? And if you can answer that question, if not, I'll go to Houshang. You just stay quiet, in fact.
Houshang.
Either answer it or...
Go ahead. This is, you have to understand, first of all, this is a global issue. Anti-immigrant sentiment is a global issue. Canada was known to be a bit more lenient towards immigrants. Part of this problem, part of this anti-immigrant sentiment is a post-COVID phenomenon. People, for the first time in Canada, people found out. For us, we were born and raised in the scarcity. We know how, like to Saf voice then, to line up for commodities, for food. We are used to that. That was the first time that Canadian society, many Western countries, societies, they felt okay. Scarcity, the abundance is not given. It could be actually, basically, it's not your right to find 5 different brands of bread.
Disagree.
So, you do?
I disagree, because I know Iranians who have talked to me about, again, if I knew that this is what it was going to be like in Canada, I wouldn't have made the big move. I had a pretty good life in Iran. I know. And so they have bought into some idea that is not, and I'm a proud Canadian, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'll extol the virtues of this country. But you tell me you haven't heard that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, I have. But I don't see your point here. How is it government or anybody's fault if they haven't did their due diligence? I don't get this part. What
the due diligence I get. The due diligence I get. But it's not the immigrant's fault, the new immigrant who's coming from Tabriz, that the government let in 3 million people, didn't have a plan. The economy becomes a mess. Those people get targeted as the scapegoats for it. That's not the immigrants' fault.
No.
So they're coming here and they're in the middle of all that. Exactly. And they're going, and that's what I'm talking about when it comes to the betrayal. Come to our country. We welcome you. We'll hug you at the airport. And then all of a sudden, fuck you, immigrant. What are you doing here? You screwed up our country, right? Yeah. And they're like, well, what am I thought, wasn't this our new fantasy land, right? That's what I'm talking about.
I do agree with that. I do. Not that we had it easy. Did we? You were actually raised here, right?
In England.
In England and here. So for us, as I moved to Canada when I was 30, and it was not easy at all. I'm sure you've been, yes. He's been studying and for forever.
He's a good Iranian.
Right? Yeah. So it's not like that there is a drastic shift from 5 years ago or 3 years ago.
Well, that's not what the studies show.
It is harder.
That the anti-immigrant sentiment has grown.
Yes.
You see it.
Chicken and egg situation here. It's not. It's basically.
Are you, by the way, just as a sidebar, are you a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party of Canada? You're defending the government a lot here.
You want me to say that I'm going to vote Conservative next
I
month?
don't want you to say anything. You're welcome to. You could happily be a card-carrying member. Houshang, on this point, the anti-immigration.
Sure. Well, what I'm thinking is, well, I'm not an economist, of course, but from my little tiny studies on different points, I would say, in a system of economy, in a system, you cannot blame one only item saying that this is the cause and this is the reason.
Right.
In my opinion, immigrants are the victim of the government's wrongdoing. So that said, I'm not going to give room to the opposite party from tomorrow saying that, look, two different graphs are skyrocketing. The first one is the inflation and the second one is the immigrants. So come vote for us because we are anti-immigrants. You know what I mean? Like I can understand where the politics is playing in here.
It's such a good point because it's a very complex line that we have to walk, because yes, I don't want a Canadian government that says shut the borders forever, no more immigrants, we hate immigrants. Of course we don't want that. I guess what I'm reacting to is, don't tell everybody that they can come in here and then create the conditions where they can't assimilate, they're not treated well here, they have lousy lives, and then tell them, by the way, 5 million of you are going to have to go home. And,
if you don't like it.
And we're not even going to do it in the obvious way. Let's get to that part. Let's get to the changes in the law that are no longer going to allow people, for example, students who could previously count on getting a work permit and stay longer or even live a life here, that are now potentially at risk of being sent home, right? There's almost part of it that pisses me off more than Trump deportation, because that is boldly in your face. This is what I plan to do. I'm going to grab you by the scruff and throw you out.
And evidence. That's evidence.
Yes. I'm not, for better or for worse, obviously. This feels more insidious.
Exactly.
You don't know whether you can stay or not. You're going to have to do some dancing to see if you can figure out a way to stay. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. Am I reading this incorrectly? I know people, a young person who came and applied for a job here who's finishing her students. I don't think she knows, came from Iran like a year and a half ago. I don't think she knows that she might be sent home. And so what's she going to do? She has to figure out, she's going to call one of you guys, and then what are you going to do? You're going to try and it's like a tax shelter or something. You have to figure out ways to hide her. I mean, what is the plan here?
The plan should come from government, obviously. And like I said, I keep repeating myself. They will do something in 2025. They will, because there's no chance in hell these people leave Canada. This mass of 5 million people we're talking about. So
any of them?
No, at least a majority of them. Right.
They're not going to leave voluntarily, as Mark Miller said.
Yeah, they won't. And they know that. Even Mark Miller knows that. But they right now they can't. They try to just.
They're not stupid.
They're stupid to not act fast. That's
which one are they? Are they stupid?
They're stupid. I still stand with stupid. But the problem is that
he's giving them a lot more credit for being conniving, people who plotted this in advance.
Problem is, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Here. No, that's fine.
Temporary people's being sent home, 5 million.
They will implement, and there are talks. I'm sure Houshang saw it. They are actually talking about some new paths to PR, permanent residency, and they will start actually introducing new paths, and they will bring down the thresholds for more people to become permanent residency, because that was permanent resident, because that was part of the plan or non-plan that they had, that okay, now we have this massive amount of people on temporary resident. We have to make sure that we try to make them permanent residents.
Is that what asylum is?
Not necessarily.
Can that woman I was talking about, that there's a student, her student visa is ending, she would want to get a work permit, but can she just say, I'm declaring asylum? How does that work?
Well, I'm not eligible to talk asylum. He's the subject matter expert.
Sure. Well, yes, they can start making claims, and they are making those claims. But as I said, to my point that we started with, RPD, Refugee Protection Division, in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 months, I have seen cases that they return to the client, to the applicant, saying that where were you in the past 2-3 years? So not legally, because Canada is a signatory of Human Rights Convention, right? So they cannot put a cap on it. But per Section 96 and 97 of IRPA, Immigration Refugee Protection Act, Canada should accept any claim that is made inside Canada if they are under danger or risk of threats, life threats, torture, etc., etc.
Canada has to accept.
Has to accept it if it is established that an applicant, if returned to their home, is under this risk of torture. And we have massive number of case laws in judicial process that the judges have ruled that the torture is not the physical torture. It can be even mental torture.
So just as a sidebar to that, if someone already has declared refugee, is a refugee from Iran, for example, under this new law, they can't be sent back.
As long as their case is not heard, no. If their case is heard and they're accepted, no. But if their case is not accepted, they will be under way to
You mean if they're
back.
still in limbo? But if they've been accepted as a refugee,
yes,
they're staying.
They're staying.
But the avenues are limited. So why would, if you have a case, if you are you will be under persecution if you go back to your country. In case of Iran, it could be either political persecution, it could be sexual orientation, it could be conversion to another faith. So there are limited avenues, and then you have to convince the judge that okay, I basically fit the bill in any of it. So it's not a you have to have a case, or you have to at some instances you have to create a case.
Are there?
Can I add something to your previous question?
Yeah.
From my standpoint as well, the government is making this snowball bigger and bigger. From what Mehran says, I'm going to gather that they will have about 5 million, 2 million, I don't care how many, there are millions of people of undocumented people living in Canada. And today, actually, they were talking...
Undocumented meaning temporary?
Undocumented. They don't have any... Undocumented. They don't have any status in Canada, but they're in streets. Either they're living in someone's basement or someone's house. And in that case, they will see that we will have this, or we are having this 2 million, 3 million, whatever of the number of undocumented people. And currently, this government is dealing with planning a way for the people who have been undocumented in the past 5 years. You know what I mean? So you're making people undocumented while you are dealing with undocumented construction workers. Right. At the moment, they're talking about this.
It's also
plus, I'm going to finish with this. I think liberal government knows that they're done. So they say that it's only a year. Let's deal with this, be happy, and leave it for the other party.
Wow.
Not stupid then.
That's very interesting. It's fascinating to me that we just finished a U.S. election where they're obsessed in the U.S. about these undocumented immigrants and immigrants coming into the country and the border and the Mexicans and whatever. And if you actually look at the raw data and the numbers, Canada has had a much bigger influx of people coming into our borders than the U.S. has. You would think it's a much bigger deal here, and I think because we have a different policy, a different culture, there was a kind of it's taken some time for it to become an issue in the same way. It's sort of like, well, we like having the immigrants here, but it is kind of weird that how quickly this is happening and how many they are. One of the things that I want you to get you guys to respond to, because he might be talking about you. One of the things that the Prime Minister said, Trudeau said, in response to the criticism he's had, this is just a couple of weeks ago, he issued a statement, as you guys know, about the immigration situation. And he says the problem has arisen due to some bad actors taking advantage of programs such as employers trying to avoid hiring Canadians, schools recruiting more international students for the higher tuition money, or scams promising bogus paths to citizenship. I think he would even be at pains to suggest that that's all 3 million, who've come in. But what do you think of what he has to say?
Obviously, he's putting blame on somebody else. This is absolutely government's fault. The situation we are in right now. That's for sure. But yes, government and the regulatory bodies failed to do their job properly. If we have a massive number of fake, fraudulent admission letters, in India, for example, we know that like the numbers are massive. I don't remember the exact number, but the number of people who actually manage to get a study permit come to Canada with a fraudulent, with a false document, with a false admission letter from such and such university. So how is it possible that nobody actually oversee the issuance of this letter? Now they fixed it. Now they actually added a layer to it that you have to go and actually province should actually give you a attestation letter that your admission letter is actually valid. But like you said, there is no chance that all 3 million people that are here are basically fit in one of these categories. So this is definitely a government's issue. This is government to blame, and he can't just blame others for their shortcomings.
Well, I think it's so obvious that Justin is going to blame everybody else but himself. But that doesn't justify, like, as I said, I'm liberal in heart, but of course he's going...
Faint praise for the liberals, yes, yeah. Liberal at heart, yeah.
But of course, Justin and his cabinet are going to blame everyone, but like everyone but themselves, and that is obvious that they are. But I'm going to object to this and saying that what fraction of all these mess could potentially be done by
Bad actors?
Bad actors. Like how many of them? Like name it. 100,000? That's a massive number. Like if 100,000 people can do illegal things in this country, then we are no longer a G7 country. It's nonsense.
But real talk amongst the Iranians here, no one's listening except just us Iranian. Don't we know employers that avoid hiring Canadian citizens?
Well, this actually is contradictory to his own justification about the COVID times that they actually brought in people in masses, because they back then we listened to employers. We brought in foreign workers to basically close the gap, and now he's claiming that bad players actually employed foreigners, not Canadians, which is absolutely baloney.
Before we end off this, I'm going to ask you about the IRGC status, because that's something you wanted to talk about before we ended up. But just to kind of get a sense of what you guys are hearing and feeling on the ground, as they say, you know, in the midst of this, being on the front lines of this. What are, of all of what we've talked about, the expiration of student visas, people potentially being sent home, the bad economies, the gig economy, people coming and being a doctor, the expectations that have been unmet. From your clients, from immigrants, either those who wish to come or those who have come here and are trying to settle or have been here for a little while, and particularly the Iranians, what would you say you're most profoundly hearing in terms of what they're concerned about?
I believe, and actually I share the feeling with them, the Canadian dream, as the way we knew it, is tarnished, or maybe it's fading away. I don't want to sound too dystopian, but it's reality. Partially, it's a global trend. Again, post-COVID, we live in a different world after COVID. But Canadian dream is not what it used to be, and especially for Iranians. Somehow they used to think, maybe again misinformation, they thought they would have it easy here. Now they know that it's not as easy as they thought, and at the same time the economy is getting a bit tighter and harder to basically get by in this economy as well. So I'm sure Houshang has the same issue in his practice. Out of 10 people I talk to, have consultation with, 8 of them, they think that, okay, Canada at the best, I'm talking about Iranians in particular, they see, at this point, they see Canada as a bridge or as a gate to the US. So
wow,
most
just a place to squat.
Yeah, let's go there and get Canadian citizenship.
That's very frustrating. That's very frustrating as a Canadian,
and
too.
honestly, it's not only for immigrants. Even many citizens, many Canadians, Iranian Canadians, I'm sure you agree with me, they are planning, or they have planned at some point to move south the border.
And why would they do that?
Because they think, well, I'm not sure about it. I haven't done my due diligence, but they think it's much easier in the U.S. Economy-wise and
to be successful.
Compared to Canada.
Houshang, what are you hearing most in terms of concerns?
Well, the main concern that I'm feeling nowadays is finding a job that they think that they deserve to have, besides securing their permanent residency status. Like, the first one is, of course, the most important part for them. At the same time, we all know that many of them have sold their apartment in Tehran, Shiraz, or Isfahan, anywhere, liquidated it, transferred the funds to Canada, and they have been spending those hard-earned monies in the streets of Canada anywhere. But the point is, I haven't seen a lot of passion or enthusiasm from much of them to just go through the channels to secure the appropriate levels of education, etc., as well. Unfortunately, that we're talking together about all the issues in the community. So they cannot secure a good job. At the same time, their threshold is so high, and they don't think that they deserve such and such kind of or like tough situation. Of course, the situation for us who have been living here probably for 40 years for yourself, or 10, 15, 20, whatever, is tough for now, tough for everyone. We can understand that. And as a newcomer, you will have darker days, absolutely, and we understand that. But still, you gotta be more agile and more passionate about your future and building this future and prospect for yourself and your family, because this is the reason that you have moved to Canada, right? You want a better prospect for yourself and your family. So let's build it. At the same time, yes, am I saying that you are all responsible? Of course not. Government is 100% responsible.
One of the things I've learned or felt during this conversation, you've intimated this a couple of times, is that if it's a bit of a, for lack of a better term, shit show now, that you both think it's going to get worse before it gets better in terms of the next year, right? In terms of how this is going to be dealt with, those 5 million that the government wants to leave, and immigration policy in general. Would that be true?
Oh, for sure. This is a domino effect. Right now, we are talking about this 5 million. By December 31st, 2025, that will be an actual issue. And then if we don't get ahead of this, there will be a basically influx of, and it's not only 2025. People will lose their status in 2026. I'll give an example. This open work, the public policy for Iranians, the open work permit. So many people applied for it in 2022, and their status will be expired in 2025. Many people applying right now. I have clients that they applied for open work permit today. So they will get an open permit valid through 2027. So this will be, this is an avalanche.
So the law, you mean, so that law hasn't gone through yet?
No, the public policy for Iranians still, it will end in late February 2025.
So anybody who gets it now is okay for another 3 years.
3 years.
But it's then you're kicking the ball down the road,
exactly.
right?
And then 2027 you will have the same problem. Maybe another 50,000 people in 2027. Just Iranians we're talking
it's
about.
untenable. It's very weird. Even the immigration minister himself doesn't seem to have a plan when he says they'll leave voluntarily. It's there's a vacancy of plan there, right? You want to say anything before we wrap up?
Well, I would say they don't have any other solution but to allocate more sources, probably to their RSCMP, to their CBSA, to come door to door looking for people, which is not possible.
And they've kind of said they're not going to do that, right? That Trump deportation thing.
Then undocumented people will be living in Canada, so that is going to be a huge problem for them. Like that's my point. Like, you're not that kind of, let's say, officials or government just to look for people unless they're trapped somewhere. But at the same time, then how are you going to handle them? They are still existing. They're breathing. They're purchasing.
And then imagine all, like every single of those 5 million leave in 2025, within 2025. 5 million is what? 12% of Canada's population? So what would be the effect of people, like 10% of your population leaving the country? So it's not only an immigration issue. It's wider than that.
One of the things, before I wrap up with you guys, and I'm so grateful to have you both here. It's been really interesting and educational. We've learned one of you is a Liberal Party member. The other one is illiberal in heart. One of the things you wanted to talk about, Mehran, it's kind of important. For a long time, many of us were agitating for the IRGC to be put on the terrorist list in Canada. It was one of the hallmarks of what we were calling for as Iranians in the diaspora here in Canada during the Massa Amini protests, Zendegi Azazi, etc. There was some of the concerns that some people had about that was, okay, let's do this, but we got to make sure we're getting the right guys. Those people who are coming in that are Ghazadehs and the type of people that we know that have been harboring safety here in Canada, and that seemingly everybody sane agrees shouldn't be allowed to be here, and should be on the terrorist list. But that it might affect some who unwittingly, unwantingly have from years ago have maybe tarnished with IRGC kind of ties. That's now happening. You were telling me, and you wanted to speak to that as a sort of asterisk, as a coda to immigration issues that Iranians are having today in Canada. Go ahead.
Sure. This is actually, Rook is a fantastic platform to bring this up and actually make awareness, because I'm sure many people who actually dealt with it or have heard of it from other people might know, but I want to make it clear to all Iranian Canadians community that right now...
and by the way, you say this as someone who has written and performed songs against the regime. It's not like you're pro-IRGC when you sort of take a position on the... yeah.
Obviously, I've been vocal enough for people who know me. They know that.
Yeah.
And we were happy when the IRGC got actually listed finally as a terrorist organization, obviously. But I think the missing link here is that we need the minister. We need the minister to actually put together a guideline for the CBSI officer, for the border officer, for IRCC officers, to know how to apply the rules and regulations here. Right now,
and that doesn't exist?
It doesn't, at least in the case of IRGC. The laws, the Canadian law says if you are a member of a terrorist organization, you're inadmissible to Canada, you and your family members, right? Being member, I think, to me, means that you go and actually enroll in a group, or you go and subscribe, or you go and actually
participate
actively. You're not chosen to. For anybody who's aware of the military system in Iran, we have two-year compulsory military service for all men, and you go and basically you have to go and actually report yourself, and they pick you. They choose you, and they put you in the army or Navy or IRGC, so you don't get to choose where to serve. Right?
Still?
Yes.
I thought this was something years ago where they forced you. I thought you could choose now.
You cannot choose, as far as I know. You can't really choose where to serve.
Okay.
But the problem is, now there have been cases that the border officer, the CBSI officer, or IRCC officer argued that this person has served in IRGC, which happens to be a military, which happens to be a terrorist organization, so he is inadmissible to Canada, which is wrong. This is a very simple fix to this issue, and all it takes is a ministerial guidelines for the officers how to apply the law. Fortunately, many people are actually active in this particular case, and they talk to MP. They actually
who are we concerned about? That somebody who wants nothing to do with the IRGC, but that 40 years ago was conscripted to be in the Iranian army for...
Or even today, like if you served in IRGC 2 years ago, and now you are out of... And you were just a private, like a sarba sifr, we say in Farsi. You did nothing. Houshang actually we're talking. If you served actually you say you've worked in kitchen for 2 years and now you're a member of terrorist organization. That's wrong.
But I mean, I hear you obviously, but at the same time, can't a member of the IRGC then say, "Well, I had no choice. I was, I mean, doesn't that become an excuse that becomes the rule?"
It won't, because if you just serve for 2 years and then get the hell out of IRGC, obviously there's a difference. If you've been a ranking member or an officer even, and honestly, I'm not even saying, if you, for example, you have an engineer who were drafted to work in, for example, a missile section of the IRGC, you should be put under some more scrutiny. You have to be dealt with more carefully. But we need to have a guideline from the minister how to apply the laws and regulations. That's it.
Houshang,
Well, what I'm going to say is that yes, according to
you're a
our-
liberal at heart. Lead with that every time.
Okay, I'm going to reiterate that so that just so you guys know about this. But from what I think is, and from what we have been communicating with the officials, government officials, and they have responded to us in different platforms and medias, the government is trying to deploy this rule in a way that the people who have been like served obligatorily are exempted from this rule. And but if the record shows that they have been serving in IRGC even for that short time of 2 years, they will go through a thorough assessment and checkpoints to make sure that they have not been beyond that. So I'll respect that. How they are going to deploy that, it's a matter of question. But on the second fold, I would say, you know that Václav Havel in one of his books said, even the accountant, even the person who has been providing supplements for those people who have been securing the prisons, etc., are responsible. My political point is that it's good, at least at this moment, everybody knows that if they serve in IRGC, they will not be allowed anywhere other than Iran. So they will, like the forces who were also indifferent about whether or not going to IRGC, now say that, okay, I'm not going to serve in this militia, and then because my prospects will
How would
be
you do
ruined.
it though? How would you do it? Like if you go to get drafted and serve for 2 years and then go and
I'm going to give you an example. That's a very great question. I recall that at the time that I was 18 years old, my father, me and my brother were supposed to go to military services. And my father once said, I am not letting you guys serve this regime at any capacity. No matter if you want to purchase something, purchase under my name or your mother's name. If you want to get a passport, forget it. I'm not letting you guys to serve for this regime. And that was the end point. And I'm thinking bigger, saying that what will happen if everybody says that we are not serving this regime? We are not going to the arenas because the women are banned. We are not going to universities because Baha'i students are banned. And what will happen next? We are not going to serve in petroleum in universities because many of people have been forbidden from entering to these universities, to these companies. So do you think that the dictator and his leverages will have enough room to play with people?
that will take its own episode to talk about all
I was
this.
just going to say, we're straying a little bit, but I appreciate the conversation. Guys,
Absolutely.
I thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the insights. I look forward to we're just continuing the conversation in the future. Thank you for
Absolutely.
being here,
It's a
Houshang.
pleasure being
Thank
here.
you, Mehran Jian.
Merci.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Big thanks to Mehran and to Houshang. We just barely scratched the surface, basically, when it comes to the issues of immigrants. As you heard at the end there, there's a lot more we can cover. And we suspect that you may have a lot to say about today's program or about my essay off the top. Maybe you think that the Liberal government, the Canadian government, has not been unfair to immigrants. And maybe you think it was a good thing to let in the 3 million immigrants, albeit sort of without a plan. If you want to give us your feedback, info@rookmedia.com or producer@rookmedia.com. Producer, try that. Producer@rookmedia.com is where you can email us, or you can just post on any of our platforms. We love to hear from you. Thanks again to the guys. And by the way, Mehran, who's a musician and a songwriter, we're going to have him back. And with some of his new music. We look forward to that, having him perform here in the Rook Hub. Remember Rook Live 4 on February 6th, coming up, February 6th, 2025, and those tickets are on sale as of now. You can get the link from our Instagram page in the bio or from our website, rookmedia.com. That's it for episode 350 of Rook. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together each week. That would be Super Parisa, Smart Pega, Savvy Roham, Seppi Wonder, Tina, the photo and video queen, as well as Bearded Omid, talented Anahita, who will be on stage with us on February the 6th. Methodical Kaver, who is already directing Rook Live. Good to have him back in the saddle. And Solid Samin, as ever. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and for sharing our content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you've been listening to us like for 4 years, I'm one of those people who actually hasn't subscribed yet. You know, you can do that for free on any of our platforms. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or on Apple or on SoundCloud or something and you want to watch this program, go over to YouTube at Rook Media. You can find me on Instagram at Jian Gomeshi. And as ever, Mizon Bashin.